The dust swirled across the barren landscape like a dancer's skirt as Violet Newsom staggered down the dirt road, her once fine dress torn and stained with the trials of her journey. Behind her lay the life she'd fled ahead, nothing but the unknown expanse of the Arizona Territory, 1878, and the small mining town shimmering in the distance like a mirage that might vanish with her next blink. 3 days without proper food or water had left her weak, her lips cracked and bleeding. The relentless sun beat down upon her fair skin, burning it a painful red despite the hat she'd stolen from a clothesline 2 towns back. She'd escaped Philadelphia with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's locket, clutched in her palm, running from a marriage arranged to a man thrice her age with hands that wandered and eyes that promised cruelty. As Violet approached the town, her vision swam. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was a pair of dusty boots rushing toward her fallen form. When consciousness returned, it came with the sensation of a cool cloth against her forehead and the gentle murmur of voices nearby. "She ain't going to make it, Mabel. Might as well stop wastin' water on her. Hush your mouth, Earl. I ain't letting a young thing like her die when all she needs is some care." Violet's eyelids fluttered open, revealing a weathered woman with kind eyes dabbing her face with a damp cloth. The room was simple a boarding house or tavern by the looks of it. "There you are," the woman Mabel, Violet presumed, said with a smile. "Thought we might lose you to the heat." "Where am I?" Violet croaked, her throat as dry as the desert outside. "Prospector's Hope," Mabel replied, helping her sip water from a tin cup. "My husband found you collapsed just outside town. I'm Mabel Johnson. I run this establishment." Violet drank gratefully, the tepid water feeling like heaven against her parched throat. Violet Newsom. "Thank you for your kindness." Earl, a barrel-chested man with a face weathered by sun and hardship, stood in the corner eyeing her with suspicion. "Where'd you come from, girl? Ain't no place for a woman to be wanderin' alone." "Philadelphia," Violet answered, seeing no reason to lie. "I had to leave." Mabel shot her husband a disapproving glance. "That's her business, Earl. She needs rest, not questions." Earl grunted but said nothing more as he left the room, the floorboards creaking beneath his heavy tread. "Don't mind him," Mabel sighed. "He's rough around the edges, but his heart's in the right place. Rest now. We can talk more when you're stronger." But strength was slow to return. The journey had taken more from Violet than she realized, and for 3 days she drifted in and out of fever dreams. When she finally regained full awareness, Mabel was there, looking more concerned than before. "You're back with us," Mabel said, relief evident in her voice. "I was starting to worry." Violet tried to sit up, finding herself surprisingly weak. "I've been a burden to you." "Nonsense." "But—" Mabel hesitated, twisting her apron in her hands. "I should tell you that there's been talk in town. Earl's been running his mouth about a fine Eastern lady showing up with nothing. People are curious and not always kindly so." A cold dread settled in Violet's stomach. "What people?" "Just the usual gossips, but—" Another hesitation. "There's also been a man asking after young women traveling alone. Arrived yesterday, well-dressed Eastern gentleman, said he's looking for his runaway fiancée." The room seemed to spin around Violet. "What did he look like?" she whispered. "Tall, gray at the temples, has a gold-tipped cane and a scar just here." Mabel touched her upper lip. Charles Winthrop, her would-be husband, had followed her. How he'd tracked her this far west, Violet couldn't imagine, but the man had resources and connections throughout the country. "I need to leave," Violet said, trying again to rise. "Immediately." Mabel gently pressed her back down. "You're in no condition. Besides, you've no money, no provisions. You wouldn't make it a day out there." Tears of frustration welled in Violet's eyes. "You don't understand. That man, he's not what he seems. The things he would do." Understanding dawned in Mabel's eyes. She'd seen enough of life's harshness to recognize fear when she saw it. "I see. Well, then we need to think of something else." The door opened and Earl entered, his expression grim. "That fancy fella's offering $50 to anyone who brings the girl to him. Says she's touched in the head and ran away from a sanitarium back east." Violet's heart sank. Who would believe her word against a wealthy, respected businessman? In her current state, she might even look the part of an asylum escapee. "I won't go back," she said firmly, despite the tremor in her voice. I'd rather die in the desert. Mabel and Earl exchanged a look, some unspoken communication passing between them. Might be another way, Earl said slowly. The supply train leaves for Fort Griffin tomorrow, if you was to be on it. Hope flickered briefly, then died. I have no money for passage. Earl scratched his stubbled chin. Old Parnell who runs the train, he's been looking for a mule to replace one that died last trip. Been offering trades. Mabel's eyes widened in understanding. Earl Johnson, you cannot be suggesting it's just business, woman. She needs to get out of town. Parnell needs a mule. We got that old mule out back that's more trouble than it's worth. We trade the mule for passage for the girl. You'd trade me like livestock? Violet asked, incredulous. Not you, girl, the mule, but Parnell might see it differently. To him, he'd be taking on another mouth to feed with no benefit. That's why we'd have to make it look like. Earl trailed off, uncomfortable with his own plan. Like I'm part of the trade, Violet finished, understanding dawning. Like you're selling me along with the mule. Mabel looked horrified. It's degrading. There must be another way. It's a way out, Violet said quietly, and right now that's all that matters. So the plan was set. The next morning, Violet found herself wrapped in a borrowed shawl, standing beside a stubborn old mule in the pre-dawn light as Earl haggled with Jebediah Parnell, a wiry man with a face like tanned leather. The mule's worth 15 easy, Earl insisted, and the girl will work for her passage. Parnell eyed Violet skeptically. She looks half dead. What work could she do? Cooking, cleaning, mending. She's handy, Earl lied, just down on her luck. I need a mule, not a woman, Parnell grumbled, though I suppose the boys would appreciate some decent food for a change. As they negotiated, Violet noticed a tall figure approaching from the livery stable. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to the saddle, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Something about him drew her attention, perhaps the way others subtly shifted aside as he passed. Parnell saw him too and straightened. Irving, just the man. Come tell me if this mule's worth a damn. The stranger Irving stepped closer, and Violet caught her first clear glimpse of his face. He was younger than she expected, perhaps mid-20s, with features that might have been handsome if not for the several days' worth of stubble and the thin scar that cut across his jaw. His eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, assessed the mule briefly before shifting to her. "What's this about, Parnell?" he asked, his voice low with a hint of a southern drawl. "Johnson here's offering his mule and the girl for passage to Fort Griffin. Says she can cook." Irving's eyes narrowed, moving from Violet to Earl and back again. "You're selling a woman for a mule." Earl shifted uncomfortably. "It ain't like that. She needs passage. I need to get rid of the mule. And she has no say in this arrangement," Irving asked, his tone deceptively casual. Before Earl could answer, Violet spoke up. "I agreed to the arrangement, sir. I need to leave town urgently." Irving studied her for a long moment, noting her Eastern accent, the fading bruises on her wrists where Charles had gripped her too tightly the night she fled, the determination in her eyes despite her weakened state. "That mule isn't worth $5, he finally said to Parnell. "And the woman isn't for sale at any price." Parnell spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Ain't your business, Irving. I'm making it my business." Irving's hand rested casually near the pistol at his hip. "She's worth more than gold to me." A tense silence fell over the group. Violet stared at Irving in confusion. She'd never seen this man before in her life. Why would he interfere? Why would he claim she had value to him? Earl broke the silence. "Now look here, Eastland, we had an agreement." "No, you had an agreement," Irving Eastland countered. "I'm making a different one." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. 20 for the mule. The lady comes with me." "And who are you to decide her fate?" Parnell demanded, "a man who doesn't abide selling human beings." Irving's voice hardened. "And a man who'll pay for the mule's fair value, which is more than you were offering." Earl looked torn between the prospect of a better deal and the unknown of what this stranger intended for Violet. "Girl needs to get to Fort Griffin," he said uncertainly. "I'm heading that direction," Irving said. "She'll arrive safely, you have my word." Something in his tone made Violet believe him, though she had no reason to trust this stranger over Earl and Mabel, who had at least shown her kindness. "What do you say, Miss Newsom?" Irving asked, surprising her by knowing her name. "Would you prefer to ride with the supply train as part of a mule trade or accompany me to Fort Griffin?" Violet hesitated. Neither option was ideal, but at least with Irving Eastland, her dignity might remain somewhat intact. And there was something in his eyes, a steadiness, an honesty that made her think he truly meant her no harm. "I'll go with Mr. Eastland," she decided. Earl nodded, accepting the money pouch from Irving. "You treat her proper, Eastland. She's had enough trouble." "More than you know," Irving replied cryptically. He offered his arm to Violet. "My horse is at the livery. Can you walk that far, or shall I carry you?" The idea of being carried through town in a stranger's arms made Violet straighten her spine despite her weakness. "I can walk, thank you." As they moved away from the negotiation, leaving Earl to finalize the mule sale with Parnell, Violet finally asked the question burning in her mind. "Why did you intervene, Mr. Eastland? You don't know me." Irving glanced down at her, his expression unreadable. "I know trouble when I see it. And I know a desperate person from a selfish one." After a pause, he added, "And I know who's looking for you." Violet stopped short, fear coursing through her. "Are you working for him?" Irving shook his head. "No, but I've crossed paths with Charles Winthrop before. I know what kind of man he is." "How? We'll talk when we're away from town," he interrupted gently. "Right now, we need to leave before he realizes you're gone. He's meeting with the sheriff as we speak, trying to get him to search every building in town." The urgency in his voice convinced Violet to save her questions. They reached the livery, where a magnificent chestnut stallion waited, already saddled. "This is Renegade," Irving said, patting the horse's neck. "He's strong enough to carry us both until we can get you a mount of your own." Before Violet could respond, Irving effortlessly lifted her onto the saddle, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, creating a secure cage that should have made her feel trapped but somehow didn't. "Hold on," he murmured, and then they were moving, trotting out of town as the sun crested the eastern mountains, painting the desert in gold and pink. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, putting distance between themselves and prospectors' hope. Violet's back was pressed against Irving's chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat a strange comfort. Finally, when the town was nothing but a distant smudge on the horizon, he slowed Renegade to a walk. "There's water in the saddlebag," he said. "You should drink." Violet accepted the canteen he offered, drinking deeply before finding her voice. "Now will you tell me how you know Charles Winthrop, and how you knew my name?" Irving was quiet for a moment, as if considering where to begin. "I was a soldier," he finally said. "After the war, I worked for a time as security for the railroads. Winthrop owned significant shares in the eastern lines. I saw how he treated women, especially young women who caught his eye. There was an incident. He trailed off, and Violet felt him tense behind her. What happened?" She prompted softly. "My sister worked as a maid in his Philadelphia home. She was barely 18. Winthrop took liberties. When she resisted, he claimed she'd stolen from him, had her arrested." Violet's stomach clenched. "What became of her?" "She died in jail, fever." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Violet could feel the tension in his body. "I confronted Winthrop. Things got physical. I served 6 months for assault, lost my position, and headed west. That was 3 years ago." "I'm sorry about your sister," Violet said quietly. "Isabel," Irving supplied. "Her name was Isabel." After a moment, he continued, "As for knowing your name, I overheard the Johnsons talking. When Winthrop arrived asking about a Violet Newsom, I knew you must be running from him. I recognized the pattern." "So you stepped in to help me because of what happened to your sister?" "Partly," Irving admitted. "And partly because no one should be sold like property, even if it was just for show." They rode in silence for a while longer, the landscape gradually changing from flat desert to rolling hills dotted with scrub and the occasional juniper. The sun climbed higher, beating down on them mercilessly. "Where exactly are we going?" Violet finally asked. "You said toward Fort Griffin, but that's still a long journey." "I have a small cabin about a day's ride from here," Irving explained. "We'll stop there to rest and get supplies, then we'll discuss where you want to go next. You'd help me that much, a complete stranger." Irving shifted slightly in the saddle. "Let's just say I have my reasons to want to see Winthrop disappointed." By midday, the heat had become unbearable. Irving guided Renegade into a small canyon where a trickle of water created a modest oasis. Cottonwood trees provided blessed shade, and the walls of the canyon offered protection from prying eyes. "We'll rest here until the worst of the heat passes," Irving decided, dismounting and then helping Violet down. Her legs nearly buckled when they touched the ground, and Irving caught her by the waist, steadying her. "Sorry," she mumbled, embarrassed by her weakness. "I'm still not fully recovered. You need food and rest," Irving said, leading her to the shade of the largest cottonwood. "Sit. I'll see what I can find." Violet sank gratefully onto the soft ground, leaning against the rough bark of the tree. She watched as Irving unsaddled Renegade, allowing the horse to drink from the small stream before securing him where he could graze on the sparse grass. From his saddlebags, Irving produced a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "It's not much," he said, sitting beside her and unwrapping bread, dried beef, and a handful of dried apples, "but it will keep your strength up." Violet accepted the food gratefully, trying not to devour it too quickly despite her hunger. "Thank you," she said between careful bites. "For everything?" Irving nodded, his gaze scanning the canyon rim as he ate. Always vigilant, Violet noticed, always watching for danger. "May I ask what drove you to flee Philadelphia?" he asked after a while. "Though I can guess." Violet swallowed hard. "My father died last year. He was a merchant, moderately successful. My mother passed when I was young, so it was just the two of us. When he died, I discovered he'd arranged my marriage to Charles Winthrop to settle business debts." "Winthrop is thrice your age," Irving observed. "Yes, and cruel in ways that aren't immediately apparent to those who don't know him well." She unconsciously rubbed her wrists where the bruises were fading. "He doesn't tolerate disobedience." Irving's eyes followed the movement. "He hurt you." It wasn't a question, but Violet answered anyway. "He has certain preferences. I refuse to submit to them. He locked me in my room until the wedding, which was to be in 3 days' time. I escaped through the servants' quarters and took the first train west with what little money I had hidden away. When that ran out, I walked." "All the way to Arizona Territory?" Irving asked, impressed despite himself. "I took odd jobs where I could, worked in kitchens, cleaned houses. Sometimes kind people gave me rides in their wagons." Violet's voice grew softer. "I just kept moving west, thinking he wouldn't follow me this far." "Men like Winthrop don't accept losing what they consider their property," Irving said grimly, "and he has the resources to search for a long time." Violet's shoulders slumped. "Then I'll never be free of him." "I didn't say that." Irving met her gaze directly. "I said he won't give up easily." "That doesn't mean you can't disappear where he can't find you." "How? He has connections everywhere." "Not everywhere," Irving said. "There are places in this territory where a person can start fresh with a new name if necessary, places where Eastern money and influence mean nothing." Hope flickered in Violet's chest for the first time in months. "Would you help me find such a place?" Irving studied her for a long moment. "Yes," he finally said, "but first we need to reach my cabin safely. Get some rest now. We'll ride again when the sun begins to set." Exhausted from the journey and the emotional toll of the past days, Violet didn't need much encouragement. She leaned back against the tree, closing her eyes. The last thing she was aware of before sleep claimed her was Irving draping his coat over her to shield her from the occasional breeze that swept through the canyon. When she woke, the quality of light had changed. The harsh midday glare had softened to the golden hues of late afternoon. Irving was nowhere to be seen, but Renegade stood nearby, resaddled and ready to depart. A moment of panic seized her had Irving abandoned her here. But then she heard the soft crunch of boots on gravel. Irving appeared from around a bend in the canyon, a brace of rabbits in one hand and his rifle in the other. "You're awake," he observed. "Good, we should leave soon, but I thought you might want to wash up first. There's a deeper pool just around that bend." He gestured with his rifle. "I'll keep watch." Grateful for the opportunity to clean away days of dust and sweat, Violet made her way to the pool. The water was cool and clear, and though she could only splash her face and arms without fully undressing, it revived her spirits considerably. When she returned, Irving had packed away the rabbits and was checking Renegade's saddle cinch. "Feel better?" he asked without looking up. Much, Violet replied. Thank you. They set off as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. Irving kept them away from the main trails, following game paths and dry creek beds that only someone intimately familiar with the territory would recognize. As they rode, Violet found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's movement, no longer tense with the awkwardness of being pressed against a stranger. Irving Eastland might be an enigma in many ways, but she was beginning to trust him perhaps because she had little choice, or perhaps because there was something fundamentally honest about him that her instincts recognized. Tell me about your cabin, she said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. How did you come to have a place out here? Irving guided Renegade around a tumble of boulders before answering. After my time in jail, I drifted west. Did some scouting for the army, some hunting. Eventually signed on as a guide for a geological survey. One of the scientists paid me partly in gold, partly in land. The cabin was already there, abandoned by some failed prospector, I imagine. I fixed it up. And now I hunt, trap, occasionally guide parties through the territory. Sometimes I do work for the army when they need someone who knows the land. A solitary life, Violet observed. Irving's arms tightened slightly around her as he adjusted the reins. It suits me. Because of what happened with your sister? The question slipped out before Violet could consider its propriety. She felt Irving stiffen behind her and for a moment thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, his breath warm against her hair. Partly, he admitted. After Isabel died, I found it difficult to be around people. Their trivial concerns, their willingness to look away from injustice if confronting it was inconvenient. Out here, things are simpler. Right and wrong are clearer. I understand the appeal, Violet said softly. In Philadelphia, everything was about appearances. What people would think, how things would look. My father arranged my marriage to a monster because it was more important to honor a business arrangement than to consider his daughter's happiness. Not all men are like that, Irving said, something defensive in his tone. I know, Violet replied. You're proving that by helping me now. The conversation lapsed into silence again as the terrain grew more challenging. They climbed steadily, following a path that wound up into the foothills of a mountain range Violet couldn't name. The vegetation changed, pinyon pines and junipers becoming more common, the air growing cooler as they gained elevation. As twilight deepened into night, the moon rose, nearly full and casting enough light to continue their journey. Stars appeared in the vast expanse above them, more than Violet had ever seen in Philadelphia's smoke-filled skies. It's beautiful, she breathed, looking up at the glittering canopy. One of the reasons I stay, Irving replied, his voice closer to her ear than she expected. No matter what happens on the ground, the stars remain constant. They rounded a bend in the trail, and suddenly a small clearing appeared before them. In the center stood a cabin, its dark silhouette solid against the night sky. A crude corral stood empty beside it, and a small garden plot was visible in the moonlight. Home, Irving said simply, guiding Renegade toward the cabin. It was larger than Violet had expected, not spacious by any means, but substantially built with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Irving dismounted first, then helped Violet down, steadying her when her legs threatened to give way after the long ride. Let me check inside first, he said, drawing his pistol. Stay with Renegade. Violet waited anxiously as Irving disappeared into the dark cabin. A moment later, a warm glow appeared in the window as he lit a lamp. He reappeared in the doorway. All clear, he called. Come in while I tend to the horse. The interior of the cabin was simple but surprisingly comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a sturdy table and 2 chairs before it. A bed occupied one corner, covered with thick furs and blankets. Shelves held books more than Violet would have expected, along with supplies and what appeared to be various tools and hunting implements. A curtained-off area presumably concealed storage or perhaps a pantry. Irving entered a few minutes later, carrying his saddlebags and rifle. It's not much, he said, suddenly seeming self-conscious as he set down his belongings. But it's dry and warm once the fire's going. It's wonderful, Violet said honestly. After weeks of sleeping wherever she could find shelter, the cabin seemed luxurious. Irving busied himself building a fire while Violet explored the small space. Despite its isolation, the cabin showed signs of care: hand-carved wooden pegs for hanging clothes, a bookshelf made with obvious craftsmanship, even a small collection of tinware that gleamed with polishing. "You've made a real home here," she observed. Irving looked up from the now crackling fire. "I never thought of it that way, it's just where I live." "No, it's more than that," Violet insisted. "This isn't just shelter, you've put thought into it, care." A hint of color touched Irving's cheeks, visible even in the firelight. "My father was a carpenter before the war. He taught me a few things." He stood, brushing his hands on his trousers. "I'll prepare those rabbits for a stew. You should rest." "Let me help," Violet offered. "I'm not completely useless in a kitchen." Irving looked like he might refuse, but then nodded. "There's a pot in that cupboard," he said, gesturing to a small cabinet, "and we'll need water from the barrel outside." Working together, they prepared a simple but hearty stew, adding dried vegetables and herbs from Irving's stores. The domestic task brought a sense of normalcy that Violet hadn't experienced in months, and she found herself relaxing further, the constant fear that had been her companion since fleeing Philadelphia temporarily abating. As they ate at the small table, sitting across from each other in the firelight, Violet found herself studying Irving Eastland more carefully. He was handsome in a rugged way, his features strong and defined, though there was a wariness in his eyes that spoke of past pain. His hands were calloused but gentle in their movements, and he ate with surprising manners for a man who lived so far from civilization. "You're staring," he observed without looking up from his bowl. Violet flushed. "I apologize, I was just wondering about you." "What about me?" Irving asked, finally meeting her gaze. "How someone educated, and you are educated, I can tell by how you speak and by your books, ends up alone in a cabin in the wilderness." Irving set down his spoon. "I told you about Isabel." "Yes, but that doesn't explain everything." Many men suffer losses without retreating from the world entirely. For a moment, Violet thought she'd overstepped. Irving's expression closed, and he rose to add wood to the fire, his back to her. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "After the war, I tried to return to a normal life. I had been studying law before I enlisted, but I couldn't settle. Everything seemed pointless: the petty concerns, the social niceties. I'd seen too much death done things." He trailed off, staring into the flames. "Then Isabel died, and whatever connection I had left to that world died with her." He turned back to Violet. "Out here, things make sense. I answer to no one but myself. I take only what I need. I harm nothing without purpose." "It sounds lonely," Violet said softly. "It is," Irving admitted, surprising her with his candor. "But loneliness is preferable to the alternatives I've experienced." Violet understood then that this man had built walls around himself as carefully as he'd built his cabin: sturdy, well-crafted, designed to keep the world at bay. Yet he'd let her in, literally and figuratively, and she wasn't entirely sure why. "Why did you really help me today?" she asked. "The truth, please." Irving returned to the table, sitting heavily in his chair. "When I saw what they were doing, trading you like property, it reminded me of things I saw during the war. People treated as less than human. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again, even if it was just for show. And the fact that it was Charles Winthrop pursuing me." A muscle twitched in Irving's jaw. "That was additional motivation. You hate him that much, wouldn't you, if he'd caused your sister's death?" Irving asked, his voice tight. "Yes," Violet admitted. "I would." The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of the fire. Finally, Irving spoke again, his tone gentler. "You should take the bed tonight. I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't possibly, please," Irving cut her off. "You're still recovering your strength. I've slept on worse than a floor in front of a fire." Too exhausted to argue further, Violet accepted. Irving provided her with a clean shirt of his to sleep in and respectfully turned his back while she changed behind the crude privacy screen he'd set up. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, the furs and blankets creating a cocoon of warmth against the mountain night chill. Violet watched through heavy-lidded eyes as Irving made a pallet for himself near the hearth, removing only his boots before stretching out on the floor. Irving. She murmured, sleep already pulling at her. Yes, thank you, for everything. His silhouette shifted as he turned toward her voice. You're welcome, Violet, sleep well. As consciousness faded, Violet realized it was the first time he'd called her by her given name. Somehow, that small intimacy comforted her as she drifted into the deepest, most peaceful sleep she'd had in months. Morning brought the scent of coffee and the sound of quiet movement around the cabin. Violet opened her eyes to find sunlight streaming through the small windows, and Irving already dressed and moving about the space, preparing a simple breakfast. Good morning, he said when he noticed her watching. There's water for washing behind the screen if you'd like. Violet thanked him and slipped from the warm bed, taking a moment to appreciate the domestic scene before her. In the clear light of day, the cabin revealed more details, sketches pinned to the walls that showed considerable artistic talent, a small collection of carved wooden animals on a shelf, a fiddle hanging from pegs. You play? She asked, gesturing to the instrument as she emerged from behind the screen, face freshly washed. Irving glanced up from the fire where he was cooking flapjacks on a flat iron pan. Poorly, he admitted with a small smile, but it passes the time on winter nights. They ate breakfast in companionable silence, and Violet was pleased to find her strength returning after a good night's rest and proper meals. When they'd finished, Irving cleared his throat. We need to discuss what happens next, he said. Winthrop won't give up easily. He'll have men searching, asking questions. You need to disappear completely or get far enough away that he can't reach you. What do you suggest? Violet asked, trusting his knowledge of the territory. Irving hesitated. There's a settlement about 5 days' ride from here over the mountains. Silver Creek. It's small but growing. They need people willing to work, especially women who can teach, keep books, that sort of thing. I can do those things, Violet said eagerly. I taught my father's bookkeeper's children in exchange for lessons in accounting. The town is isolated enough that Winthrop's influence wouldn't reach there, Irving continued, and if you used a different name. I could start over, Violet finished, hope blooming in her chest. Truly start over, Irving nodded. I can take you there, help you get established. I know some people in town who would vouch for you. Why would you do all this for me? Violet asked, searching his face for answers. Irving looked uncomfortable with the directness of her question. Because it's the right thing to do, he finally said. And because I know what it's like to need a fresh start. Violet reached across the table, impulsively placing her hand over his. Thank you, she said simply. Irving's hand tensed beneath hers, but he didn't pull away. For a long moment, they sat like that, connected by the simple touch, until Irving finally cleared his throat and stood. We should prepare to leave tomorrow, he said. It's a difficult journey and you'll need proper clothing and supplies. The rest of the day was spent in preparation. Irving hunted briefly, returning with a small deer that he butchered efficiently, preserving the meat for their journey. Violet helped where she could, washing and mending clothing, preparing food packs. Irving also presented her with sturdier clothing, trousers, boots, and a heavy jacket. These belonged to a woman who stayed here briefly last winter, he explained when Violet looked questioningly at the female attire. She was a naturalist, studying the mountain flora, left these behind when she departed with a lighter pack. The clothes fit well enough, and Violet had to admit the practicality of trousers for riding. They worked together efficiently, and by evening, everything was prepared for an early departure. As they sat before the fire that night, eating the last of the rabbit stew, Violet found herself reluctant to leave this sanctuary they'd briefly shared. In just a day, the cabin had come to represent safety in a way no place had since her father's death. Tell me about Silver Creek, she said, partly to distract herself from the melancholy that threatened to overtake her. What kind of place is it? Irving leaned back in his chair, his expression softening as he described the small settlement. It's in a valley, protected from the worst of the weather by mountains on 3 sides. Good water, fertile soil. The silver mine that gave it its name played out years ago, but the town survived. Good people mostly, hard-working. They look out for each other. It sounds lovely, Violet said, trying to imagine herself there. It could be a good home, Irving agreed. For someone looking to start fresh. And you, do you ever go there? Irving nodded. A few times a year for supplies I can't make or hunt myself. I'm known there, but not close to anyone. Always the solitary hunter, Violet observed with a sad smile. Irving's eyes met hers across the table. It's safer that way. Safer, perhaps, Violet agreed. But is it better? Irving had no answer for that, and soon after, they retired, Violet again taking the bed despite her protests, Irving again making his pallet by the fire. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the soft sounds of Irving's breathing, Violet realized with a start that she was beginning to care for this quiet, damaged man who had risked himself to help her. The thought was terrifying. She was running from one man's unwanted attentions. Developing feelings for another seemed foolish in the extreme. Yet there was something about Irving Eastland that called to her: his integrity, his quiet strength, the pain he carried but didn't let define him. Sleep was long in coming that night. The journey to Silver Creek began at dawn. Irving had acquired a second horse, a steady mare he called Daisy, for Violet to ride. The trail was challenging, winding up into mountains covered with pine forests before descending into hidden valleys. Irving led the way, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing bits of knowledge about the plants and animals they encountered. They made camp the first night in a small clearing beside a stream. Irving efficiently set up a lean-to shelter, built a fire, and prepared a simple meal from their supplies. Violet helped where she could, determined not to be a burden. As they sat beside the fire after eating, Violet found herself studying Irving's profile in the flickering light. He seemed more relaxed away from the cabin, as if being on the move suited him better than staying in one place. "You seem at home out here," she observed. Irving glanced at her. "I feel at peace in the wilderness, always have, even as a boy." "Tell me about your childhood," Violet prompted. "Before the war." For a moment she thought he might refuse, but then he began to speak, his voice taking on a warmth she hadn't heard before. "I grew up in Virginia, small town near Richmond. My father had a carpentry shop, made furniture mostly, fine pieces that wealthy families would commission. My mother taught at the local school. Isabel was born when I was 8. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "It was a good childhood, simple. I helped in my father's shop, learned to work with my hands. My mother taught me to love books. Isabel followed me everywhere, wanting to do everything her big brother did." "She sounds wonderful," Violet said softly. She was. Irving's voice caught slightly. "Bright, curious, always getting into mischief. When the war came, I enlisted immediately. Believed all the talk about honor and glory. My father was against it, but I was young and stubborn." "How old were you?" 18, old enough to fight, too young to understand what I was fighting for." Irving's expression darkened. "By the time I figured it out, it was too late. I'd seen too much, done too much." "And your family?" "My father died in '63, pneumonia. My mother followed a year later, heartbreak, I think, though they called it fever. Isabel went to Philadelphia to work. She wrote to me when I was still in the army. Her letters kept me sane." The pain in his voice was so raw that Violet instinctively moved closer, placing her hand on his arm. "I'm sorry for all you've lost." Irving tensed at her touch but didn't pull away. "Everyone loses people," he said gruffly. "It's part of living." "True," Violet agreed. "But that doesn't make it hurt any less." They sat in silence for a while, the crackling of the fire and the night sounds of the forest surrounding them. Eventually, Irving spoke again. "What about you? What was your life like before all this?" Violet sighed, drawing her knees up to her chest. "Sheltered. My father was protective after my mother died. I rarely went anywhere without a chaperone. My education was proper but limited to what was considered appropriate for a merchant's daughter, enough arithmetic to manage a household, enough literature to be conversant at dinner parties, enough music to entertain guests." "You sound bitter about it," Irving observed. "I am in some ways," Violet admitted. "I wanted more. I used to sneak into my father's study to read his books on commerce and world affairs. When he discovered me, he was more amused than angry. He started teaching me the basics of his business." "But not enough to let you run it after his death," Irving guessed. "No, that never occurred to him. A husband was the only future he could imagine for me." Violet's voice hardened. And Charles Winthrop was willing to forgive substantial debts in exchange for a young wife. How much older is he? 30 years my senior, already buried 2 wives, though he presents himself as tragically widowed. There were rumors about the second Mrs. Winthrop's death, but nothing that could be proven. Irving's expression darkened. I believe those rumors. The man has a cruel streak that he hides well in public. Yes, Violet agreed quietly. I discovered that during our engagement. Irving looked at her sharply. Did he hurt you? Violet hesitated, then nodded. Not where it would show. He has specific ideas about a wife's duties and submission. When I objected, he demonstrated how he would correct any willfulness after our marriage. Irving's hands clenched into fists. If I ever see him again, you won't, Violet interrupted firmly. Because you're helping me disappear, remember, that's how we defeat him, by ensuring he never finds me. Irving took a deep breath, visibly calming himself. You're right, getting you safely to Silver Creek is what matters now. They retired soon after, each wrapped in their own blankets on opposite sides of the fire. Despite her exhaustion from the day's ride, Violet found herself watching Irving as he slept, wondering about the man beneath the carefully maintained reserve. There were moments when his guard dropped when he spoke of his sister, when he showed her kindness, when he laughed unexpectedly at something she said that revealed glimpses of who he might have been before grief and war hardened him. The next 3 days fell into a pattern. They would ride from dawn until midday, rest during the hottest hours, then continue until dusk. Each night they made camp, prepared simple meals, and talked by the fire. Irving gradually shared more of his time in the army, his brief career with the railroad, his decision to head west after Isabel's death. Violet told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, her love of mathematics and literature, her dreams of someday seeing the great cities of Europe. On the 4th night, as they made camp in a grove of aspens whose leaves shimmered silver in the moonlight, a subtle shift occurred between them. Perhaps it was the cumulative effect of days spent in each other's company, or perhaps it was the unexpected intimacy of their fireside conversations. Whatever the cause, Violet became acutely aware of Irving as more than her rescuer or guide. As they sat beside the fire after their meal, Irving unexpectedly asked, "What will you do in Silver Creek? Beyond surviving, I mean." Violet considered the question. "I'd like to be useful. Perhaps teach, as you suggested, or keep books for local businesses. Eventually." She hesitated, then continued more softly, "Eventually, I'd like to build something of my own, a small business, perhaps, something that would be mine entirely." "What kind of business?" "I don't know yet," Violet admitted, "but I've always had a head for numbers and organization. My father said I would have made a better son than most men's actual sons when it came to commerce." Irving smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "I believe that. You have a determined spirit." "Thank you," Violet said, warmed by his approval. "What about you? Will you always live alone in your cabin?" The smile faded from Irving's face. "Probably. It suits me." "Does it?" Violet challenged gently. "You seem to enjoy conversation well enough." "You've been good company these past days." Irving looked away, uncomfortable with her observation. Temporary companionship is different from the obligations of town life. "Is that how you see relationships? As obligations, aren't they?" Irving countered. "Expectations, responsibilities. Disappointments? They can also be support, comfort, joy," Violet replied. "Shared burdens are lighter, shared pleasures are greater. Perhaps for some people," Irving conceded. "I've found that connections bring pain more often than not." "Because nothing lasts forever?" Violet asked. "That's a dark view, Irving. By that logic, we should never enjoy anything that will eventually end." Irving studied her across the fire. "You're quite philosophical for someone who's running for her life." "Near-death experiences tend to clarify one's thinking," Violet said with a wry smile. "When I collapsed outside Prospector's Hope, I thought I might die there, unknown and unmourned. It made me realize how little I'd actually lived. And now I want to live fully, whatever time I have," Violet said with simple honesty. "I want to experience things, not just survive them." Something shifted in Irving's expression, a softening, a moment of recognition, perhaps. Whatever it was, it made him look younger, less burdened. "You're a remarkable woman, Violet Newsom," he said quietly. The compliment hung in the air between them, unexpected and sincere. Violet felt color rise to her cheeks and was grateful for the firelight that might disguise it. "Thank you," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, their eyes held across the flames, and for a moment Violet thought Irving might say more. But the spell was broken by a distant wolf howl, reminding them they weren't alone in the wilderness. Irving stood, suddenly all business again. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow's trail is challenging. We'll climb most of the day before descending into the valley beyond." The moment whatever it had been was gone, and they prepared for sleep in their usual fashion. Yet as Violet lay in her blankets that night, she caught Irving watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher before he turned away. The 5th day of travel brought them to the top of a ridge overlooking a broad valley. Far below, Violet could see the scattered buildings of Silver Creek nestled along a winding watercourse that glittered in the sunlight. "There it is," Irving said, bringing his horse alongside hers. Silver Creek. Violet stared at the distant settlement, a complex mix of emotions washing over her: relief at reaching their destination safely, anticipation of a fresh start, and unexpectedly regret that her journey with Irving was nearly over. "It's beautiful," she said, meaning it. The valley was verdant compared to the arid lands they traveled through, with cottonwoods marking the creek's path and fields in various stages of cultivation surrounding the town. "It's a good place," Irving agreed. "The people are decent for the most part, hardworking, mind their own business." "You speak as if you know them well, for someone who visits only occasionally." Irving's expression was unreadable. "I observe, it's a habit from my scouting days." They began the descent, following a trail that switchbacked down the steep mountainside. As they rode, Irving provided practical information about the town who owned the general store, which of the 2 saloons was respectable enough for a woman to enter for a meal, who might hire someone with Violet's skills. "The widow Cooper runs a small boarding house," he explained. "Clean, respectable, she might take you in exchange for help with her books and the younger boarder's education. Her arthritis makes writing difficult." "You seem to have thought this through thoroughly," Violet observed. Irving looked slightly embarrassed. "I wanted to ensure you'd have options." The consideration touched Violet deeply. This man, who claimed to prefer solitude and detachment, had nonetheless planned carefully for her future well-being. As they approached the outskirts of town, Violet felt a growing anxiety. "Irving," she said suddenly, "what name should I use?" "I can't be Violet Newsom anymore." Irving considered this. "What was your mother's name?" Catherine Ellis before she married." "Ellis is common enough not to draw attention," Irving said. "You could be Victoria Ellis, similar enough to your real name that you'd respond naturally to it." "Victoria Ellis," Violet repeated, trying the name on like a new garment. "Yes, I think that could work. We should establish a simple background for you," Irving continued, "something close enough to the truth to be maintained easily. You're from the East, recently widowed, seeking a fresh start away from painful memories." "Widowed?" Violet questioned. "It's simpler," Irving explained. "A widow has more freedom than a single woman, less questions about why you're alone, traveling unaccompanied." Violet nodded, seeing the logic. "And how do we explain how I came to be here, with you?" Irving's jaw tightened slightly. "I found you when your wagon was attacked by bandits. Your husband was killed. I brought you here as the nearest settlement." "That's close enough to the truth to be believable," Violet agreed. "We should avoid mentioning Philadelphia specifically," Irving added. "Just say you're from back east. The less detail, the better." As they rode into town, Violet was struck by how small and rough it was compared to Philadelphia, yet how alive it felt. Children played in the dusty street. Women hung washing on lines strung between buildings. Men worked at various trades in open-fronted shops. The main street boasted a general store, 2 saloons as Irving had mentioned, a small church, and various other businesses. People looked up as they passed, curiosity evident in their expressions. A stranger in town was clearly an event, especially a woman riding alongside Irving Eastland, whom they clearly recognized but seemed surprised to see. Irving led them to a modest 2-story building with a small sign identifying it as Cooper's boarding house. He dismounted and helped Violet down, then tied both horses to the hitching post. "Ready?" he asked, studying her face. Violet took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." The boarding house was clean and simply furnished. Martha Cooper, a stout woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, greeted them in the small parlor after Irving knocked on the open door. "Irving Eastland," she said, obvious surprise in her voice. "Haven't seen you in town for months, and who's this?" Irving removed his hat. "Mrs. Cooper, this is Victoria Ellis. She's had some trouble on the trail, lost her husband to bandits about a week back. I was hoping you might have a room for her." Martha Cooper's expression softened with sympathy as she looked at Violet. "You poor dear, of course I have room." "Not many boarders this time of year. Mrs. Ellis is educated," Irving continued. "Good with figures and teaching. I thought perhaps you might appreciate help with your books and the Miller children's lessons." Martha's eyes brightened. "Indeed I would. These old hands don't hold a pen like they used to, and those Miller boys need a firmer hand than mine with their studies." The arrangements were quickly made. Violet would have a small room on the second floor in exchange for keeping the boarding house accounts and teaching the 3 Miller children who lived there with their father, a widowed blacksmith. "I'll fetch your things," Irving said once the details were settled. Outside, as he untied their horses, Violet struggled with the sudden realization that this was goodbye. Irving would return to his solitary cabin, and she would begin her new life as Victoria Ellis. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice unsteady, "for everything." Irving busied himself with the saddlebags, avoiding her gaze. "No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Violet said firmly. "They wouldn't have. You know that as well as I do." Irving finally looked at her, his expression conflicted. "You'll be safe here," he said. "Winthrop won't find you. Martha Cooper is a good woman. She'll help you settle in." "Will I see you again?" Violet asked, unable to keep the hope from her voice. "I come to town occasionally for supplies," Irving replied, his tone carefully neutral. "I'll check on you when I do." It wasn't the answer Violet wanted, but she nodded, accepting it for now. Irving carried her few belongings into the boarding house, spoke briefly with Martha Cooper about some additional arrangements, then returned to where Violet waited on the porch. "I should go," he said, clearly uncomfortable with prolonged farewells. "There's still daylight to make some distance back." "Of course," Violet said, fighting the urge to ask him to stay, knowing it would only make things more difficult. "Thank you again, Irving. I owe you my life." Irving shook his head. "You owe me nothing." He hesitated, then added, "Be well, Violet." He mounted Renegade, tipped his hat to her, and rode away without looking back. Violet watched until he disappeared around a bend in the road, a strange emptiness settling in her chest despite the promise of safety and a new beginning. Martha Cooper appeared beside her. "Come inside, dear," she said gently. "I'll show you to your room. You look like you could use some rest." Violet followed, blinking back unexpected tears. This was what she had wanted: safety, a fresh start, a chance to build a life on her own terms. Yet watching Irving ride away, she couldn't help feeling she was losing something precious just as she'd found it. The next weeks passed in a blur of new routines and faces. Violet, now Victoria to everyone in Silver Creek, settled into life at the boarding house. The work was straightforward: keeping the accounts, teaching the Miller boys for 2 hours each morning, helping with meals and cleaning. Martha Cooper was kind but no nonsense, respecting Violet's privacy while ensuring she met the town's influential residents. The story Irving had crafted about her past was accepted without question. As a recent widow, she received sympathy, but also a degree of independence that would have been impossible for a single woman. Several of the townspeople went out of their way to make her feel welcome. The minister's wife brought a cake. The general store owner extended credit until she was back on her feet. And even the gruff blacksmith, Mr. Miller, expressed his gratitude for her patience with his rambunctious sons. Slowly, Violet began to feel secure in her new identity. She developed a routine, made acquaintances, even began to enjoy aspects of her new life. The simplicity of Silver Creek was refreshing after Philadelphia's rigid social structures, and she found unexpected pleasure in small things: watching sunsets from the boarding house porch, helping Martha bake bread, teaching the Miller boys to appreciate poetry along with their arithmetic. Yet beneath it all ran a current of restlessness, a sense of something missing. Each time a rider appeared on the road from the mountains, Violet found herself watching, hoping to see Irving's distinctive silhouette. Each day that passed without his return deepened her disappointment, though she chided herself for it. He had done more than enough, saved her life, brought her to safety, given her a chance at a new beginning. Expecting more was foolish. A month passed, then two. Summer heat gave way to crisp autumn mornings. Silver Creek celebrated its annual Harvest Festival, a joyous occasion that brought the entire community together for dancing, feasting, and competitions of various sorts. Violet helped decorate the town square, baked pies with Martha, and even allowed herself to be coaxed into joining a reel, partnered with the shy young assistant from the general store. Life was good, she reminded herself. She was safe, useful, even beginning to prosper in a small way as some of the town's business owners hired her to organize their accounts. Yet still she found herself scanning the horizon, hoping for a glimpse of a rider on a chestnut stallion. It was early November when Irving finally returned to Silver Creek. Violet was in the general store, purchasing supplies for the boarding house, when a murmur went through the other customers. She turned to see what had caught their attention and froze. Irving stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the bright day outside. He looked much as she remembered, perhaps a bit leaner, his beard more fully grown in, but unmistakably the man who had rescued her months before. Their eyes met across the crowded store, and for a moment the bustle and noise faded away. Irving nodded once, a slight movement that might have been missed by anyone not watching for it, then stepped aside to let an elderly woman enter the store. Violet finished her transaction in a daze, barely hearing the shopkeeper's friendly chatter. By the time she emerged onto the boardwalk, Irving was nowhere to be seen. Disappointment washed over her, followed by determination. If he was in town, she would find him. She completed her errands quickly, then made her way to the livery stable, reasoning that he would have left Renegade there. The stable boy confirmed her suspicion. "Mr. Eastland came in about an hour ago," he told her. "Said he'd be staying a day or two." "Do you know where he went after leaving his horse?" Violet asked as casually as she could manage. The boy shrugged. "The hotel, probably. That's where he usually stays when he's in town." Violet thanked him and headed back to the boarding house, her mind racing. Should she seek Irving out? Wait for him to come to her? What if he had no intention of seeing her at all? She was so lost in thought that she nearly walked straight into the man himself as she rounded the corner onto the boarding house porch. "Irving," she exclaimed, stumbling back in surprise. He caught her arm to steady her, then quickly released it. "Violet," he said, then corrected himself. "Victoria, I was just coming to see you." Up close, she could see the changes in him more clearly. He looked tired, with new lines around his eyes, but there was something else to attention, an alertness that reminded her of their first meeting. "Please, come in," she said, gesturing to the door. "Martha is visiting her sister in the next town. We can speak privately." Irving followed her inside, removing his hat as he entered. In the parlor, he stood awkwardly, as if unsure of his welcome. "Please sit," Violet offered, indicating the sofa. "Would you like tea or coffee?" "No, thank you," Irving declined, though he did sit. "I can't stay long." Violet took the chair opposite him, studying his face. "You look tired," she observed. "Has something happened?" Irving met her gaze directly. "Winthrop is still looking for you." A cold weight settled in Violet's stomach. "Here in the territory?" "Not yet," Irving assured her. "But he's expanded his search. Hired Pinkerton agents. They've been asking questions all through the Western Territories." "How do you know this?" "I have contacts," Irving said vaguely. "People who owe me favors. I've been tracking Winthrop's movements since we parted." Violet's heart beat faster. "All this time, is that why you haven't returned to Silver Creek until now?" Irving looked away. "Partly, I wanted to be certain you were safe before I came back. My presence might draw attention." "And am I safe?" Violet asked, fear creeping into her voice despite her efforts to remain calm. "For now," Irving said. "The Pinkertons are currently focused on the Dakota Territory, but eventually they may widen their search further west." What should I do? Should I leave Silver Creek? Irving shook his head. Not yet. You've established yourself here. Victoria Ellis has a history now, connections, that's valuable protection, but I wanted to warn you to make sure you remain vigilant. Thank you, Violet said softly. For continuing to look out for me. Irving shifted uncomfortably at her gratitude. I made a commitment to help you. I keep my promises. Is that the only reason? Violet asked before she could stop herself. The question hung in the air between them. Irving's expression tightened, then softened almost imperceptibly. No, he admitted, it's not the only reason. Hope fluttered in Violet's chest. I've missed you, she said simply, deciding honesty was the best approach. I've thought about you every day since you left. Irving looked pained. Violet, Victoria, she corrected with a small smile. Victoria, he amended. You shouldn't, I'm not. He trailed off, clearly struggling with what to say. Not what? Violet prompted gently. Not interested, not capable of caring, because I don't believe either of those things. Irving stood abruptly, pacing to the window. This isn't why I came to warn you to make sure you're safe. And I appreciate that, Violet said, rising to stand near him, though not too close. But now that you're here, can we not speak honestly with each other? These past months have given me time to think, to understand my own feelings. Feelings born of gratitude and dependency aren't reliable, Irving said stiffly. Is that what you think this is? Violet asked, hurt by his dismissal. That I've confused gratitude with deeper emotions. It would be natural, Irving replied, still not looking at her. I helped you when you were at your most vulnerable. Psychology suggests psychology be damned, Violet interrupted, surprising both of them with her vehemence. I'm not some sheltered girl who doesn't know her own mind. Yes, I'm grateful to you, I always will be. But what I feel goes far beyond gratitude. Irving finally turned to face her. What do you want from me, Violet? The truth, she said simply. Do you feel anything for me beyond a sense of obligation? Because if you don't, tell me now and I'll never speak of it again. The silence that followed was deafening. Irving's expression was a battlefield of conflicting emotions: desire, fear, hope, resignation. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough. I feel more than I should, more than is wise for either of us. Violet took a step closer. Why isn't it wise? Because I have nothing to offer you, Irving said, frustration evident in his tone. I live alone in a cabin in the wilderness. I have no fortune, no position in society, and I'm a broken man, Violet. The war, Isabel, the years since they've taken parts of me that can't be restored. I'm not asking for restoration, Violet replied softly. I'm not asking for fortune or position. I've had those things, or at least the promise of them, and they brought me nothing but misery. What I want is a man of integrity, a man who sees me as I am and values me for it. A man who understands that life is precious and fleeting. You deserve more than I can give, Irving insisted, though his resolve was visibly weakening. Let me decide what I deserve, Violet countered, taking another step toward him. I've had enough of others determining my worth and my future. They stood close now, close enough that Violet could see the pulse beating in Irving's throat, could smell the familiar scent of pine and leather that she associated with him. I'm afraid, Irving admitted in a near whisper. Not of Winthrop or his men. I'm afraid of caring too much, of losing someone else I can't bear to lose. The vulnerability in his confession broke something open in Violet's heart. Without thinking, she reached up and laid her palm against his cheek. Irving closed his eyes at her touch, leaning into it almost imperceptibly. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen, Violet said softly. No one can promise that, but I can promise that whatever comes, it's better faced together than alone. Irving's eyes opened, meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. For a long moment, they stood frozen in that tableau, on the precipice of something neither had planned for but both now recognized as inevitable. Then Irving's hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his face. You're sure? He asked, his voice barely audible. About this, about me. I've never been more certain of anything, Violet replied with perfect honesty. Something in Irving seemed to release at her words. The tension he'd carried since entering the boarding house, perhaps since they'd met, eased from his shoulders. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down until his forehead rested against hers. I've thought of nothing but you since the day I left, he confessed. I told myself it was concern for your safety, responsibility, but it was more, so much more. Violet's heart soared at his words. Then why stay away so long? I thought it was better for you, Irving explained. A clean break, a chance to build a life without complications, without a man who brings danger simply by association. Did it not occur to you that I might want a say in that decision? Violet asked, though there was no real reproach in her tone. A rueful smile touched Irving's lips. I'm not accustomed to consulting others about my choices. It's been a long time since anyone's opinion mattered to me as much as yours does. The simple admission melted the last of Violet's reserves. She tilted her face up, a silent invitation that Irving accepted without hesitation. His lips met hers in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened as months of unacknowledged longing found expression. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Irving rested his forehead against hers again. What happens now? He asked. Now, Violet said with a smile, we figure it out together. Day by day, Irving nodded, drawing her closer. Together, he repeated, as if testing the word. I think I could get used to that. The news of Irving Eastland courting the widow Ellis spread through Silver Creek with the speed that only small-town gossip can achieve. By supper time, Martha Cooper had heard the news from 3 different sources, each adding their own embellishments to the story. I always thought there was something more to your arrival here, Martha said that evening as she and Violet prepared dinner for the boarders. The way Irving spoke about you brought you here personally. He's never shown such interest in anyone's welfare before. Violet smiled, unable to contain her happiness despite the complications that might lie ahead. He saved my life, she acknowledged, but it's become much more than that. Martha patted her hand affectionately. I can see that, dear, and it's about time that man allowed himself some happiness. He's carried his burdens alone for too long. Over the next few days, Irving remained in town, staying at the small hotel but spending most of his time with Violet. They walked together in the evenings, talked for hours, and gradually began to envision a future neither had thought possible when they first met. I can't stay in town permanently, Irving told her as they sat on the boarding house porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. The walls close in on me after a while, but I could visit more often, or, Violet prompted when he hesitated. Or you could come to the cabin sometimes, Irving suggested cautiously. It's remote but beautiful in its way, peaceful. Violet considered this. A compromise then, time in town, time at your cabin, our cabin, Irving corrected softly, if you wanted it to be. The implication was clear and Violet's heart raced. Irving Eastland, are you proposing marriage to me? A flush crept up Irving's neck, visible even in the fading light. Inelegantly, perhaps, but yes, I suppose I am. Violet laughed, not at his discomfort but from pure joy. Then yes, I accept. Inelegant proposal and all. Irving's answering smile was like sunrise after the longest night. He took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. I never thought I'd want this again, connection, partnership, a future with someone. You've changed everything, Violet Newsom. As have you, Irving Eastland, she replied, squeezing his hand. You showed me I was worth more than what others valued me at, more than a business arrangement, more than a mule. She smiled at the memory of their first meeting. Worth more than gold, I believe you said. And I meant it, Irving assured her. Though I had no idea then how true those words would prove to be. Their wedding took place a month later in Silver Creek's small church. It was a simple ceremony, attended by the townspeople who had come to respect Victoria Ellis, and the few who counted themselves friends of the solitary Irving Eastland. Martha Cooper stood as Violet's witness, beaming with satisfaction at the match she claimed to have predicted from the start. Violet wore a dress of pale blue, sewn by the minister's wife and the town's seamstress as a wedding gift. Irving, nearly unrecognizable in a clean suit and with his beard neatly trimmed, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the short aisle to join him. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but the meaning behind them was anything but conventional. Two people who had lost everything, who had known profound grief and fear, promising to build something new together, something neither had believed possible just months before. As winter settled over Silver Creek, the newlyweds divided their time between the town and Irving's cabin in the mountains. In town, Violet continued teaching and keeping books, building a small business that soon had more clients than she could easily manage. Irving found that town life was more bearable with Violet by his side, and he even began taking occasional jobs guiding survey teams or hunting parties, work that used his skills but allowed him to return to her. At the cabin, they created a shared sanctuary. Violet added touches that made the rustic space more comfortable: curtains at the windows, better cooking utensils, more books. Irving built additional furniture, including a larger bed and a writing desk where Violet could work on her accounts. Together, they expanded the garden and added a small chicken coop. Spring brought news that initially filled Irving with terror: Violet was expecting a child. His fear of loss, of being unable to protect those he loved, briefly overwhelmed his joy at the prospect of fatherhood. "What if something happens?" he asked late one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively over the slight curve of Violet's stomach. Out here, so far from doctors, from help, Violet covered his hand with her own. "We'll take precautions. I'll stay in town when the time grows near. Martha has delivered dozens of babies in her time, and Dr. Simmons, for all his gruffness, is a skilled physician." "I can't lose you," Irving admitted, the fear naked in his voice. "Either of you. You won't," Violet promised, though she knew it wasn't entirely hers to guarantee. "But Irving, this is life, real, messy, unpredictable life. The kind you avoided for so long, the kind we both deserve to embrace fully, risks and all." Gradually, Irving's fear gave way to cautious excitement. He built a cradle, carving intricate designs of forest animals along its sides. He expanded their cabin, adding a small second room for the child. He even began teaching Violet to shoot, insisting she be able to defend herself and their child if necessary. As summer turned to fall again, word reached them through Irving's network of contacts that Charles Winthrop had finally abandoned his search. A business associate had introduced him to a wealthy young widow in Boston, and the prospect of a new alliance had proven more compelling than his wounded pride. "You're truly free now," Irving told Violet as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in familiar glory. Her pregnancy was advanced now, her body rounded with the new life they had created together. "I've been free since the day you said I was worth more than gold," Violet replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Everything since has just been confirmation of that truth." Their daughter, Isabel Catherine Eastland, was born on a crisp October morning in Martha Cooper's boarding house, with the old woman and Dr. Simmons in attendance. Irving, pale with worry but steady in his support, held Violet's hand throughout her labor, whispering encouragement and love. When the tiny girl was placed in his arms, something in Irving that had been broken for decades finally healed. Tears streamed unashamedly down his face as he gazed at his daughter, then at his exhausted but radiant wife. "She's perfect," he whispered, "like her mother." "She has your eyes," Violet observed, reaching up to touch his cheek, "and hopefully your strength." "Your courage," Irving countered, "and determination." As Isabel grew, so did the life Violet and Irving built together. They added to their cabin, eventually creating a comfortable home that balanced Irving's need for wilderness with Violet's appreciation for certain civilized comforts. Violet's bookkeeping business thrived, eventually becoming the financial cornerstone for many of Silver Creek's enterprises. Irving's reputation as a guide and hunter brought steady work when he chose to take it, and his knowledge of the territory proved valuable to both the growing town and the occasional government survey. 2 years after Isabel's birth, a son joined their family, James Earl Eastland, named for Irving's father and the man who had, however clumsily, helped bring Violet and Irving together. The children thrived in their unusual upbringing, equally at home in the town and in the wilderness, learning both Violet's love of books and Irving's respect for nature. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Irving presented Violet with a gift, a small, leather-bound journal in which he had written their story, from the day they met outside Parnell's supply train to the present. "So our children will know," he explained as she turned the pages, tears welling in her eyes at the careful handwriting, the honest recounting of their journey. "So they'll understand that value isn't measured in gold or social position or the opinions of others. It's measured in courage," Violet continued, looking up at the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "In integrity, in love freely given and received. In family," Irving added, pulling her close as they watched Isabel chase butterflies in the meadow before their cabin, little James toddling after his sister with determined steps. "In the home we've built together." Violet leaned into his embrace, overwhelmed with gratitude for the path that had led her here, a path that had begun in desperation, but had led to joy beyond anything she could have imagined, when she collapsed outside a dusty mining town all those years ago. "Worth more than gold indeed," she murmured, turning to kiss the man who had seen her true value when others had tried to barter her away. "And getting more precious every day."